So the Speaker of the House doesn't know, hear, or ever run into, couldn't define white privilege. Well, my guess probably could. In fact, I'm sure there are many people who can. Jim Vincent from the NAACP will be my guest. Honored to have Jim back on the program. He kind of burped out a what? My word. After the Speaker of the House came up with that gem in the Providence Journal series they're doing on race in Rhode Island. And I think it's an important conversation, so we shall have it on this Wednesday evening. Thank you for tuning in to My State of Mind here on MyRI TV at 7:30 and 11:30, and of course on Fox Providence at midnight, where so many of you are staying up past Family Guy. And you should, you know. There's the DVR, but I like it when you're watching live. Let's go to the rundown and take a look at some of the things that are going on here. Yeah, boy, I'll tell you, this is kind of fascinating. If you're not really paying attention, and why would you be? Because we have Tuesday afternoon at 4:30 oversight hearings on the worst calamity this state has had in its modern history, at least in the last few decades. That's why it's such a sham. But here's the Eyewitness News coverage of the House Oversight 38 Studios hearings yesterday, and the chairman, Macbeth, saying she wants Kurt Schilling.
The failed 38 Studios deal, requesting the video gaming company's founder, Kurt Schilling, to come before the committee to discuss what he knew about the $75 million deal.
So the first thing that happens is we're sending letters requesting, first of all, Kurt Schilling to come in front of the committee. If he chooses not to respond or answers no, then we will forward it with a subpoena.
The committee also wants to hear from Deloitte. The chairwoman says the company never completed a forensic audit of 38 Studios requested by former Governor Lincoln Chafee.
Because it's a company, we've requested the documents also with that, and we've given them a little more than 10 days to respond, and if they don't, then we'll go forward and pursue that also.
This subpoena has to come from the Speaker. What's the conversation been like with him and possibly getting that to happen?
Certainly, we've talked about it, and it's been whatever information that we need, we're going to move forward and get that information. And while we have been very cautious about doing subpoenas, they are certainly on the table to do when we need to.
Okay. Chairperson Macbeth is scheduled to be a guest on this program next week to elaborate, because I'm looking forward to hearing just how open the Speaker is to subpoenas, because frankly, in my less than humble judgment, admittedly, on this case, because I'm furious about it, you should be too, we need to be issuing dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of subpoenas. In fact, we should start with all 75 members of the House of Representatives to vote for the loan guarantee program that allowed for 38 studios. And pardon me for racing through this. I'm so familiar with it. Unfortunately, you're not, or at least you're not up to speed. But the headline on the front page of the Journal today actually is the real story. She dropped a bomb on dealmaker Michael Corso. At least the Journal picked it up. You know, Michael Corso is this guy in this picture. He's the guy that, you know, brought the deal, brought the parties together, had a 5% incentive clause in his contract with 38 to pay $3.75 million to him. He got $2 million of it plus some equity in the company. And there's a whole bunch of rigmarole that goes on with his lobbying identification and you know, his beating back the Secretary of State last effort to hold him accountable for that. And Macbeth more or less, you know, did a real pounding of Mr. Corso in the 4 minutes at the beginning of the hearing yesterday. Unfortunately, we don't have the Capitol Television video to show you. We'll try not to be sans that next time we make this evaluation. But if you can go back to the Capitol Television website and take a look at it, you would be doing yourself a favor, because it is provocative and completely out of place, and probably not appropriate for the chairman to do what she did. But at the same time, she's trying, and she's the only one that's really trying, and nobody else is trying, so I forgive her. Next item. Does that make any sense to you? Probably not. But, if I had a half hour, I do on the show, but I have a guest. I could do a half hour every night for the next 3 years and still be trying to explain 38 Studios to you. Cash flowing, yeah, I just want to make a note like everybody's doing. A headline here for the governor, boy, she is doing really well. Fundraising, 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 fundraising. Let's put it this way. Can we just say this about Gina Raimondo? We've learned some things here in the first year of her gubernatorial run. She and her organization are professional politicians. professional politicians raise a lot of money. Professional politicians have goals to move up in politics. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're concerned about good governing where they is when they are raising the dough. Just saying. Hey, a follow-up on last night. Now, this is a little complicated. You might be disappointed, at least interimly. So Phil Isle, a journalist, was here last night explaining this case. This is a case where he is suing the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration and the federal government in totality to try to get some records on a story out of Ohio, actually a guy in Chicago who was convicted in Ohio of dealing too many prescription drugs. It's a book he's trying to write. And interestingly enough, the U.S. Attorney here, Peter Nerona, has filed a dismissal recommendation in the courts. And Phil has been, apoplectic about it. Last night he posted on Facebook that this show was the only media outlet that is actually trying to hold the U.S. Attorney accountable. I'm just kind of checking in with the U.S. Attorney's Office, trying to figure out why they're participating like they're doing with Mr. Isle's effort to write a book from court records that I think should be public. He was really, really upset about it last night.
And this is why I appreciate you having me on here. This case should not be in the shadows. This should be in the spotlight, because it's an example of glaring transparency issues. Our country, unfortunately, in this year, 2015, can't live up to its most basic principle.
Now look, last night I promised that I would contact the U.S. Attorney's Office, me or my staff, and my producer, Lexi Chris, and we did. And here's what we found out. We found out that maybe I don't have my entire diligence straight, and the U.S. Attorney's Office was actually very helpful in complying with my request to get a response to Mr. Isle, but we confused each other on the phone with the facts of the case, and so I got to do more diligence on it. I mean, when I make a promise, I keep it, but my point is that I find it a little bit more complicated, and so I'll dig deeper. For Mr. Isle, for America. Okay, let's move on. I don't know if that made any sense to you, but it's one of those nights, I guess. This may not make a lot of sense to a lot of people, but 52% of the folks in Fall River certainly think it did. The headline is this. I looked at this last night and I thought, this guy beat Sam Sutter? He beat him 52-48, and I'm thinking 23 years old. Now, somebody's running this kid. No 23-year-old is a self-starter. Hell, your brain's not even formed until 25. No 23-year-old is capable of running a city like Fall River. But then I saw him on TV.
Well, just so thankful for the opportunity to serve, and thankful for all the supporters that I have, all the friends, the family. I'm thankful to God, and I'm ready to move the city forward.
I mean, all the right things and pretty mature. So we're inviting him in. Mr. Mayor-elect, get in here. I want to see how a 23-year-old beautiful mind works. Fascinating. Bush numbers. These numbers don't work. Holy moly. Yes, plummeting, falling through the floor. Jeb is now, Quinnipiac says, he's now at 4, count it, 4%. You know what? He's going to have to learn to take the gloves off or find another hobby. Your state of mind is important to us. 228-1886. State of mind at myritv.com. Tweet, Facebook post, do what you like. I'd love to hear from you. In the meantime, I'd love to hear from Jim Vincent, NAACP, on white privilege. Stay with us. Yeah, so this is a real easy talk radio conversation as long as you say, white privilege? There's no such thing as white privilege. And then people go, and every bigot in southern New England calls in and says, of course there's no white privilege. You know, my Italian and my Irish and blah, 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 and my Polish. And I tell you something, uphill both ways, 4 feet of snow. We had no money. And these, there's what? Here was the headline that caused all the conversation on House Speaker Mattiello I don't think there's white privilege. Now, we don't have the video from the projo.com thing for I don't know what reason, but anyway, we've got this. And here's a transcript of what he said in part. I'm not sure I ever thought of a phrase like white privilege. I don't think there is a white privilege. Oh, there's more. Nobody has any privilege in our society. There are minority students that are thriving in Central Falls and Providence. That's like, when I read this, I think to myself, it's like, oh yeah, I know a black person. And then, what else did he say? We got another one. The opportunity is there for those that really engage. Oh, okay. So, as long as you're not lazy. Man, Jim, welcome.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Thank you for inviting me, Dan.
At the risk of some of my audience that might think that I am some kind of Black Lives Matter enabling lefty blah, blah, blah.
Well, they know you better than that.
Well, right? Well, but some things are just need to be stipulated to. Were you horrified at the speaker's remarks?
I was pained by it.
Pained?
Pained. Because, his actions over the last year tell me that he understands that there are some issues in terms of people of color. I mean, he was behind the racial profiling legislation that got passed because, of course, he's the Speaker of the House, and the Speaker of the House wants something passed, and it gets passed. So I understand that. So and it was passed. Also, I understand that in terms of the school suspension bill, that he's favorably disposed to having that passed in the next session. It kind of died when the session.
I think people get the racial profiling bill to a certain extent, but the suspension issue
school
is what?
suspension issue is that there is a disproportionate amount of students of color that get suspended out of school for the same offenses.
Oh, this was the ACLU thing. They were here for
exactly. Yeah.
And so
we're trying to minimize out-of-school suspensions, and we're trying to also deal directly with the fact that students of color are being suspended 4 times, 5 times, 6 times as much as white kids for the same thing.
And so what's the legislation call for?
It just calls for fewer out-of-school suspensions in terms of discretionary kind of charges. No, we're not talking about a kid that
How do
comes
you
to school with a
legislate
gun.
that?
Well, I mean, there's...
Seems like that's a whole other show, isn't it?
It's a whole other show, and I guess, there's some criteria in terms of, what you will not suspend a kid out of school for.
Got it. Okay, we'll put that aside with a mental note. That's another show.
Yeah, that's another show.
So he's done that and that, and so you...
So to me, it seemed like, he was sensitive. He seemed like he got the fact that there are some issues in terms of the communities of color. So when he said what he said, I was kind of like, whoa, that doesn't kind of equal what I'm seeing him do. And maybe that's a whole different conversation in terms of his awareness in terms of communities of color in general and the white community in general, in terms of all the data, all the facts. Maybe he's just not up on, the fact that there's a big difference.
Well, look, I've been pretty tough on the speaker in the last month on a bunch of different things, and this didn't help. But let me just say this. Taking him out of it, using his words, but taking him out of it, there's this thing out there which is, hey, I'm not picking on anybody.
Right.
I'm not prejudicial.
Right.
People make words up.
Right.
I ain't no racist.
Right.
In fact, I even work and know a couple of black people.
Right.
And I mean, that's a little hyperbolic, but I mean, that's the thing. And then that then jumps right to, which means
Right.
there ain't no thing like this. And
they're mutually exclusive. The person could be the best person in the world and not have done anything to a black person, but he has to understand that relative to black people, he has an advantage. Like it or not, he has an advantage, and he exists in a world where there are advantages relative to people of color. We see it in terms of mortgages. We see it in every aspect of life, and a person might not have wished for it or said, I want this, but you just inherit it because that's just the nature of the country.
All right, so I would say, look, first of all, do me a favor, define as succinctly as you can what the term white privilege means to you.
What it means to me is that you have a country that was built on slavery, and you have had institutional racism, and you've had all these horrible things that have happened to people of color. And that has not happened to white people. Now, not to say that white people haven't struggled, because the majority of white people that we have here in Rhode Island have struggled. It's tough out there relative to other whites, let's say. But we're not talking about whites versus other whites and how hard the struggle it was with certain whites versus whites that weren't struggling. We're talking about white people in general versus black people in general. So what's happened is that you had a system where maybe 50 or 60 years ago, you had restrictive covenants on property. So if a black person, no matter how qualified, wanted to buy a property, let's say in Barrington or East Greenwich or whatever, he couldn't. And the federal government backed that up by saying we would now guarantee loans to people of color up until the 60s. Well, if you were able to buy a property that a black person who was equally as qualified couldn't, just because you were white and you didn't have those restrictions on you, then you had somewhat of an advantage that could be passed down to your kids and their kids. And we know that property means wealth, and you can fund education, you can do a lot of different things.
And so that was years ago, and so it exists today in what form?
And it exists today in terms of, let's say, trying to get a job. If you can have two identical resumes, you can have one Megan and one Shamika. The HR director looks at equal resumes, Megan and Shamika, and can only call back one person. 9 times out of 10, that person named Megan is going to get the call back.
Why
and
do,
not Shamika.
why do you feel confident in saying 9 times out of 10?
Because Shamika, I think, is a subconscious bias that Shamika is probably a black person, probably won't fit in here.
Is that your gut, or you have data to show those numbers?
That's my gut, and I think there is data to show. I don't have the data, but it has been proven that people of color that have identifiable names don't get callbacks as much as other people, let's say with names like, I don't know, I don't want to stereotype names. And it's been proven even when the resumes are almost identical. There have been studies on everything, and there's been studies on that.
All right,
it's a fact.
I'm not going to put you on a hot seat because although the 9 out of 10 number is,
let's just say a majority of times.
Yeah,
majority of times.
Because it all makes sense.
Fair. That's fair.
Here's what I don't understand. All the speaker had to say in this Providence Journal series, when he's at a conference table being asked by Ed Fitzpatrick about a former column that had been written on this concept of white privilege, all he had to say was, that verbiage aside, I could take some time to think about what that means. But we know this has been an uneven playing field for a long period of time. And look, we got some work still to do. And here's what I've done to try to help it, and here's what I don't understand about it, and I just need more community input, and I need more discussion. And all he had to do was do that. Instead, he went right to, I don't know it, I deny it, I don't understand it, then it must not exist.
Yeah.
That worries me on 2 levels. One, dialogue at that level of government is somewhat suppressed because there's not necessarily an open mind to some concepts. But 2, the acumen of the speaker on other issues. That's what. Do you see it on that level too? Well, I worry that if he gives that kind of a base answer to that question, that base responses are coming on things that have nothing to do with race, but everything to do with our taxpayer dollars.
And you could make that leap to that, and I can see how you can. Yeah, it's problematic. It does make me pause, when I hear things like that, because it's so accepted by other people. I mean, Gina Raimondo was asked the same question, and she, hit the sweet spot. Jorge Lorza says, there are some people that just deny the facts. The facts are the facts. And why can't we just accept that and let's move on? I mean, are we still talking about whether or not it exists or not?
Have you gotten a dialogue with the speaker about this?
No, I haven't.
Do you feel like you should?
Yeah, probably. I probably, will give him a call and say, let's just have a cup of coffee and have a discussion about it. And I'm sure he'll be receptive.
When we come back, there's another thing that's interesting going on in the city. It's called this Black Major movement. I'd like to hear what Jim has to say about that. Don't go anywhere. All right, so welcome back. The other night I had some comments of my own on the Black Major movement here, which is kind of an interesting thing. There's a headline I think that Kev could probably pull out. We're going to do some more programming on this next week. I had a very fascinating conversation about it on the air the other day. Jim Vincent from the NAACP was not necessarily a sponsor of this particular rally. Were you there? Were you participating? Do you support what they were doing?
I support what they're doing. I was there at the very end.
Okay. What's the argument?
Okay, the argument is this. Police, we've been working with police, NAACP, and a lot of community, other activists and organizations have been working with the police to have better police-community relations in Rhode Island, especially in the wake of Ferguson and Baltimore and all that kind of stuff. It just made sense that the police community should come together to be preemptive in terms of anything happening like that, anything quite like that in Rhode Island. So we've been talking for a couple of years now. Police, the state police, the Providence police, all kind of different police departments, and I think it's been a great thing, and we've been sitting down in different forums. So anyway, What's come out of that is that the police have said that in order for us to have better police-community relations, we have to have the confidence of the community. We need to have the community have confidence in us. If we have that, we can solve crimes, we can do our jobs better, and everything will be better. So I've heard that. So that's right here. Okay, so we got to do things to increase confidence and closeness. So I go back to the community. Well, what do we need to do to do that? They said, well, we have an issue in terms of the fact that most of the police departments, the command staff does not look like the community, and they don't reflect the cultural values of the community. So we need people in command. I mean, it's good that they're doing efforts in terms of the rank and file, and I support those efforts, and most people in the community, they support them as well. But we have to do things all together at the same time. It's not one thing or another thing. It's doing everything at the same time. So Providence Police in Providence is the capital city, only has a African American at the sergeant level. There's nobody above a sergeant. Okay, and so there's probably reasons why that isn't, whatever. But the fact is that we need to make sure that the community has confidence in the police. So if by having somebody in command increases that confidence, then that's what you want to do, and that's what the police want.
I think I'm getting disputed reports as to what the mayor thinks about this. The journal Alicia Pina wrote in the race series that the journal is doing that he supports it, but I see no evidence of it. We had people on the radio saying that he actually said no in a meeting. Look, I think the administration, like Nick Mattiello, can handle it this way and say, look, big priority. Got to get there from here. Yeah. We got some union negotiation to do in terms of how we move folks up. We got to take a look at the entire evaluation process. And you know what? We may throw a political appointment in here just to make sure this thing feels like it's going in the right direction, because the truth is the major appointments are political appointments. They are not test appointments.
That's right.
But jumping a sergeant to major, going over lieutenant and captain, could infuriate the rank and file depending on who it is and what the. So you got to make sure that everyone's having an honest conversation about it.
Right, and we have had an honest conversation about the morale and the whole thing of jumping ranks. That's why you have to have a qualified candidate, a person that's as qualified or more qualified, be the person, so that there isn't that feeling that he's only there because he's black. And we understand how that can be tough on the person as well as the department, as well as, it just doesn't do anything for anybody. So if you have a person that's just as qualified or more qualified, and I don't know why people they always wonder whether or not a black is qualified. Nobody ever asks that question whether or not a white is qualified. They just do it, but we have to be qualified. So I never understood that. So you get somebody that is qualified beyond a shadow of a doubt to be in that position. It is a political appointment. Okay, so the community now has more faith in the police and working better with the police. The police are now able to solve more crime, and you're better off, and you don't have the potential, let's say, of a Ferguson or Baltimore, because you're doing all the right things.
Right. Well, we'll do more on this. I think it's a difficult, but a good issue to discuss.
Yeah, I mean,
take the temperature down. Say we all agree we got to do better, and make a legitimate effort to do so, it seems to me.
I talked to the mayor, and he didn't say yes or no. And my thing is,
gee, that's not surprising. That's kind of
right. But I mean,
I'd like to live in my world.
But the fact is, you get the morale of the police department over here, and you get the morale of the black community over here. If I got to pick one, I'm worried about the morale of the black community.
Well, that's your job.
That's it.
All right. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Jim Vincent. One more thing. Boy, these social, cultural, racial issues are so important, and we just never have enough time. But we'll follow up next week on the Black Major movement. Tomorrow, we're going to goof off a little bit with the Comic-Con stuff, which is a cultural phenomenon. And then a guy by the name of Laffy. Did you ever hear him? Yeah, the former Mayor Cranston. He's back in town. He'll be my Friday guest. We'll see you on the radio at noon tomorrow on WPRO. Good night.